that's what you pay them for. So he did what he does. So that would be why.
Back in the audience, please. Yes.
Mr. Brombeck, as a potential legislator, it's very important, as you've already stated, that you uphold not only the federal Constitution, but that of our great state of Washington. How do you feel about the McCleary decision, and what would you do to help ensure adequate, ample funding of basic education?
You might explain the McCleary decision.
Are you up on McCleary?
Yes, I am. The clear decision is basically Washington State Supreme Court is telling the legislature that it needs to abide by its obligation under the Constitution to fully fund education. The question is, what's fully funding? What's basic education? That's been defined by the legislature, and the court is basically telling the legislature to spend another $4.7 billion that we don't have. I think the legislature is going to have to, rather than concede to the Washington State Supreme Court, stand its ground, insist that there are separations of government, and fulfill its obligation to fully fund education without raising taxes. We can do that. You know, as you can imagine, as a lawyer, I've been through a lot of school. I know what a fundamental basic education is. It's not all the bells and whistles. If you talk to people, for instance, that work in just the lunchroom, how much of that food that kids get for free is thrown away? More than half of it. Whole pieces of fruit. There's no accountability. Why is that? We all know the answer. Government has no competition, so government is inefficient. That's why we need people in government who have a business background. Now, my opponent, who's a very nice man and a person that I like very much, honestly, has been in government his whole life. I run a law firm. I have 12 employees. I have a bottom line. I've been lowering the overhead every year that I've been there. That's what you have to do. You have to go in and cut. Now, the reality is that we're dealing with an entrenched legislature over there in Olympia that is adamant that it's going to raise taxes. Not just on education, but on fuel. Pensions are underfunded. There's a debt over $80 billion. I can tell you that it's a very difficult fight. And will I be able? I'm not a king. I'm just running as a legislator from the people. But I'm also a lawyer. I negotiate every day. I deal with people on the other side who don't agree with me. I do know how to get along with people. I really do. Even though it may, sound like I'm adamant. And when I talk about the Constitution, I am. But they need to be brought to task, because I tell you what, when you raise taxes too much, you hurt the economy, more people on public benefits, and it spirals down. My home state, where I grew up, was in Michigan until I was 18 and went in the Army, and I've been here since 1991. Raised all my kids here and so forth. I'm a Washingtonian. But I've seen what has happened in Michigan. Mismanagement, a leftist approach to government, and more taxes, and all these desire to pay for these programs. It doesn't work. It ends in bankruptcy. Detroit, largest municipality in the history, went bankrupt. We have to have a business approach, and I'm going to stand strong on that. I will. Thank you.
Okay. Question? Scott?
This question is for Dan Gunkel. Bill and Bradstreet list your company, Gunkel Construction, as a $560,000 company and employs 6 people. Your website seems to conflict with your job as a PUD commissioner. Why won't you address this ownership to the newspaper at these forums? Do any of these projects ever become the responsibility of our PUD?
I take that question to be the ongoing question about conflict of interest. Gunkel Construction is a small civil construction company that currently has 2 employees. have never worked for KPUD. Dan Gunkel, Gunkel Construction, has never been on the small works roster, has never been on the large works roster. There has never been any transfer of any money to either Dan Gunkel or Gunkel Construction from Klickitat PUD. A number of years ago, there was an inquiry about the potential for conflict on the construction. The state auditor looked at that. They found that there was nothing there. They notified the interested party of their findings. There is no conflict. There has been no conflict. Thank you.
Mike?
This one is for the assessor position, Mr. Schroeder. Why does the current assessor say the county did not meet the IAAO standards when they did in 2010, according to DOR?
I don't know why she says it. She does say it. She continually refers back to the 2009 audits, the 2009 IAAO standards. I actually did some research on that recently, and there's some handouts back there. I figure factual information and actual information is better than made-up report cards. So basically, if you look back in 2009, the previous administration met, I think, 6 or 7 out of 8 of the standards for IAAO, and then once again in 2010 they met all of the standards. I think it makes her sound better when she refers back to 2009, but it's not a fact. In 2010 they were fine, and also they were not the worst in the state in IAAO standards. That's a mouthful. And also with their ratios, if you go back to 2009, they had 88.5% ratio, which is not a great ratio, but it also was not the worst ratio in the state. And the average that year, I think, was about 91% for all of the counties. In 2010, there was a Department of Revenue, it was kind of like a news bulletin that actually stated that Klickitat County was the only county that met, that reached their 100% ratio for both real and personal property. So what everyone needs to understand is numbers can be manipulated. And if you go back to 2009 and before, the county was on a 4-year revaluation cycle. And as you all know, the market was very, very strong in land. Land, you know, within a 2 or 3 year time frame would double or triple in sales. And you would have 2, 3, 4 sales of the exact same parcel. It started out at 70,000, it went to 90,000, up to 150,000 in that 2 or 3 year time span. So if you look at those numbers, you'll look at all of the 4-year cycle counties had a lower ratio than the yearly revaluation counties. When Van took the county to a yearly revaluation cycle, like I said, 100% ratio on real property and personal property, and he met the IAAO standards. I think having factual information instead of fabricating things is what you're looking for in the future assessor. So vote for me is a vote for you.
I guess I have a prerogative, so Jeremy, if you would like to address that also.
Well, I'm a little bit less knowledgeable about the ratio numbers back in 2009, but I do know that whether it was 2009 or 2010, the 2013 numbers show a definite improvement in the assessor's office. So Darlene is running off of that record, and we're not paying attention to whether 2009 or 2010 numbers were better or worse. We're running off of the 2013 numbers that show a factual improvement in the assessor's assessor's office.
Another question for
Yes.
Mr. Dingman.
Who's the question for?
Dingman Hall, please. Bob Dingman Hall, please.
Yes, sir.
My question is, you're running in a very conservative district here, and being a Democrat, why?
Now, my wife asked me the same question.
Exactly, this is real conservative.
You know, it's a challenge, but if you look at the district, it's less of a Republican district than it is sort of an independent district. People, you know, Obama might win and instantly might lose. Murray, I think, lost in the district, but Cantwell won. So we've shown in this district that people are very much of their own mind. And there are a lot of people out there right now that are not happy with the way they're being represented right now. And those are the people that I get out and I talk to all the time. And it's funny how some areas sort of begin to dovetail. As you know, I was out there a couple of times debating with Michael Delavar, who I actually found to be quite a nice guy, even though we disagreed on many things. But things like corporate welfare, people are getting sick of that. Why should huge companies get all the breaks when the average worker doesn't? And you know, we've seen things like in the schools right now where teachers haven't gotten cost of living raises in 6 or 7 years now. And so, you know, while it's a challenge to run here, it's also an incredible honor. And you know, if I don't do it, who is? So, you know, it's time to step up, and I've enjoyed it.
This is for Dave Souter. The Airport Industrial Park engineering documents for the infrastructure are based on 2007 estimates. Can you tell us, did the project go over cost, and if yes, how much?
I'm trying to recall the exact number. That is correct. When we originally started the airport business park, it was in '07. We had gone. In fact, I was like a brand new baby commissioner. One of the first things I had to do was go to the CURB board, Community Economic Revitalization Board. That we were competing for a grant for the business park. And they were like, oh, we want you to go. And so I went, and in fact, Dan Newhouse was still a legislator then, and he served on the CURB board. And he was like, it's gonna be fine, it'll be okay. So I went to the CURB board, as I said, in '07. We had originally planned on that project. We went for $1 million, which was the maximum that you could go for. They did award us it was 50% grant, 50% loan. At the time in '07, we always knew that the $1 million was not enough to fully fund the project. That there was gonna have to be other grant dollars or other airport dollars that would have to go into the project. The project was delayed numerous times from environmental appeals, Columbia River Keepers, Friends of the Gorge, various other folks. Tried to delay that project, and it was delayed until it was constructed in 2013. At that time, I think our total budget for the project was about $1.5 million. I want to say it was 1580. We had put together all the funding for that project. The project actually came in under budget. We actually saved a little money on that project, even though we did run into some rock there. So it was actually came in under budget and ahead of time as well.
Question?
I have a question for Mr. Canal. Via your own campaign ad that I read from Mr. Canal this week, you were an employee of the that time, is that correct? And why did you let that go if you're so desiring?
David, you want to come up here and answer?
Being an employee again.
Why didn't I spend years working for people I didn't want to work for? Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Juris. I think they're fine people. I didn't want to work for them. I didn't like the direction of the office at the time.
So if you don't share the same?
Not at all. I think you should respect the people that you work for. Well, I think that's going too strong. I think you need to, at least in some way, admire and agree with the people that are giving you direction and that you work for. And if not, then it's perhaps best to move on. And I started my own firm after consulting with some local judges and other attorneys about different options I had. And some very, very kind folks in the local bar were nice to point out that I had the skill set necessary to succeed opening my own business. And I took that under consideration, and because I wanted to stay here, and that's what I did. I opened up a firm, and I've been doing very well.
But you want to go back? Speak your head.
I want to serve the public, correct? Okay.
Thank you. The table?
This is for Mr. Quisnell again. You have moved a lot during your brief career. Do you expect to stay in our county long enough to do the job?
It's Mr. Cannell. My career has spanned 2 years, and I've moved once. I started out my career in New York City, where I graduated from law school, and I clerked for a federal judge, and I worked at a law firm. And I moved to the Gorge. So it's been 12 years and one move, went to New York and to here. So I'm not sure where that question comes from.
Scott, how did you vote on the DREAM Act?
Maybe how I would have voted on the DREAM Act. I would not have voted for the DREAM Act. My opponent did. And for those of you who might want to know, it's basically, if you're undocumented, it's taxpayer money for undocumented folks that want to go to higher education, basically college. I know that if you want to go to college, you can go. I know that I went in the Army to pay for it. A lot of people just go to work. Do whatever. K through 12 is enough. Looking at the budget, state budget, we can't afford these things. I do believe, and I think it's important to be honest on all these things. My opponent's heart is in the right place, honestly. It's just not a fiscally sound type decision that he made. And also, I'd add that along with the higher education kind of question, you know, I mean, I've got the degrees. Too many people go to college because everybody tells them they ought to go to college. I believe in trade schools. You know, I believe that there's a lot more to be made there. You got to follow your direction and also serve an economic purpose. Some of these degrees that people get are worthless. And I'm not going to offend anyone by naming them, but some of them have no economic viability. I have a 20-year-old daughter that's in college right now, and I've made sure, you better get a degree in something that earns a paycheck. You know, this is not just for an academic exercise. You need to earn a living. So, there you go.
From the floor? Back on the board.
Mr. Songer, it says, I read on Facebook you said you support neither prosecutors. Meanwhile, when I stopped by your booth at the fair, you said you strongly support Dave Quisnell.
I do not support either prosecutor, or either one, what Dave's running for prosecutor, or who's currently prosecutor. I have my own campaign to run. And I did not tell anybody at the booth that I was supporting Dave Quisnell. So I don't know, this is, you know, the thing is, guys, we're getting close to the end of the election. And you notice how much budget's being slumped? It's ridiculous. I haven't brought it up, but Sheriff McComas and his candidate, Mark, along with some of their other supporters, fired off a missile in the Enterprise, putting deputies under investigation for donating to my campaign. Where is their First Amendment right in this? This is ridiculous. It's gotten to this point. I have purposely tried to run a positive campaign. Even at times, it's very difficult not to fire back. I've had people come to me with stuff for Mark, and I've refused to run with it. And I'm going to continue to refuse to run with it, because I believe the voters of this county are smart enough to connect the dots and know when it's dirty politics. Thank you.
I love this job. Somebody ask a good question out there. There you go.
This is for Mrs. Hochter.
Mrs. Hochter, you're on. You know her?
Oh, yeah, I'm Lori Hochter's Chief Deputy Prosecuting Attorney, and I think that Mr. Songer's response does need a follow-up. Mrs. Hochter, when you as prosecuting attorney refer a citizen complaint to the Attorney General's office, have you in any way taken a position on the validity of that complaint by that referral?
No, not at all. And that's the whole point of referring it. The investigation component is with the sheriff to refer it, and my piece simply is to say that my office will not review or take any position on the merits of that complaint. It would be improper for us to do so in this situation, and so there has been no judgment from my office, no review of whether it's legal or not legal, or any position on that situation.
Another question from this side? Over here. Mike?
Mike Richards. To date, county commissioner travel is quite extensive and expensive. The former commissioner, Joan Fry, even wrote a letter to the editor of today's Enterprise defending these taxpayer-paid trips. How necessary are trips to Tucson, Louisiana, and Hawaii in conducting county business?
I'm not sure that those expenses are required at all. It seems to me that the county business is here within the county. There are also, today, in this day and age, there's many other ways to conduct county business if you need to meet with people that do not reside within the county. Telephones, teleconferences, you can Skype the conference. There's many other ways than using county taxpayer dollars to fund travel that may or may not be necessary.
You want to respond, David?
Oh, I'd love to respond. First off, I'm not exactly sure that the question mentioned Hawaii, Tucson, Louisiana. I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about Hawaii. Tucson, I'm assuming they're talking about, I did take a trip 2 years ago to Tucson, which was the Western Interstate Conference, which again, these are WASAC, NACO, which is National Association of Counties. I'm on the board of directors for the National Association of Counties. I was elected to that position by my counterparts around the state, other county commissioners, to go represent their interest at the national level. And that's why that's not county taxpayer dollars that are funding it. It's the state of Washington, the state association, and the national association that are paying for it. And I think anybody in here that has belonged to any organization, say like the Grange or something, or other ones, sometimes you travel to represent your organization, the organization picks up the tab. Totally normal. As far as the issue of necessary travel, yes, there is absolutely necessary travel that must take place as far as a county commissioner. Not necessarily, the vast majority of the travel is in the county, and it's also, or in the state of Washington. Yes, there are ways, believe me, you could look at my cell phone bill, you could look at the enormous volume of emails I have. We utilize all of that technology, but there is no substitute sometimes for a face-to-face conversation. It's not the same. We all know that. I do conference calls when you can, but I can tell you from being on the other end of it, if you are at the meeting and there is somebody on a conference call, they are a second-class citizen. They are not the same. Half of the information that you're getting is through body language and what's going on. There is just absolutely no substitute for being there in person. And the dollars that we're talking about are infinitesimal compared to the benefits that come back to this county and the resources that we're able to bring. And to quote Ms. Fry, the Board of Commissioners, we're actually spending less money in 2013 than we were in 2006. So as a fiscally responsible commissioner, we've already done everything we possibly can do to control that spending. And so what we're spending now is significantly less, particularly if you consider inflation. As we all know, what's happened to fuel costs and all costs since '06? And it's actually, in 2006, the county spent $16,500 on travel for all three commissioners. And in 2013, we spent $15,000. So you do the math. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have about 10 more minutes of questions, and then we'll run down the line, and then anybody can say what they want in a couple, 3 minutes to counter or whatever. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what is your viewpoint on what we just asked Lori Hochter, Bob Songer?
I'm trying to remember what you commented. Oh, yeah. You notice I did not mention her name as far as McComas and Mr. Boardman and their endeavor to get our deputies investigated and possibly criminally charged for donating to my campaign. She says that she didn't review it in detail, and I take her word for that. But what I will say, RCW 41.06.250 does away with the law that Mr. McComas was trying to get out there. I talked to Sheriff McComas about this, because what's sad about it, this was released to the media and the enterprise prior to our deputies even getting served with the paperwork. They knew nothing about it. And here all of a sudden, because they exercised their First Amendment rights to support me as sheriff and contributed to my campaign, they're being looked at now and investigated as we speak for a misdemeanor crime. And that is just ridiculous. Nobody should have to, everybody in this room should have a right to vote for who you want, support who you want, and donate to who you want. The deputy should not have to give up that right because they're a deputy sheriff. That is ridiculous. And so anyway, I wasn't picking on Lori on this, but I happen to know for sure that Mr. Boardman, back at when the Huck Fest was going on, he had talked to the Benjamin White Salmon police officers and informed them 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever the Huck Fest was, and informed them that law enforcement officers, civil service employees, could not donate to my campaign. All right, that's what they related to me. I asked Mr. Boardman about that, and he admitted that he did talk to him, but that he was told about it. I asked him who told him. He said, I'm not going to tell you that. The point I'm making is the sheriff stated that he talked to the prosecutor back in June or July on this matter, and my question then went to the sheriff was, well, why is this just hitting the paper on September 29th, if there was a concern? And they're going back to August 13th on one deputy, I believe, or May or whatever it was in 2013, and the statute of limitations already ran out if there was any crime. However, the statute I just read to you, there is not a crime. And I just stress, be aware, and I think you are. I think most people realize it's getting close to the election, and what it spells to me is desperation. When they got to start slinging mud, then it's desperation. So hang in there, we'll get through all of this, and thank you.
Okay, we'll have one response response, I think, is appropriate. No, sir, just a moment. One response from Mr. Boardman on that, and then we're going to go one more question from each of you, and we're done. Except going by the line.
Thank you for giving me the chance to respond to this untruthful allegation. In the first place, I was not involved in the decision. I was made aware that this was going on, so I wasn't totally blindsided, but it wasn't my decision, it wasn't my call to pursue this matter. As a matter of fact, when I was brought to my attention that this was a violation that was brought to the sheriff's office, I was concerned about just exactly this, that I would be the one that they put the burden on or accused of mudslinging or doing something that was inappropriate or untoward. The fact of the matter is that there is a statute that does not in any way prohibit their opinions or their support or their vote. What it does do is make a specific restriction on the political activities of civil service employees in a sheriff's office is to their, I'll read it verbatim, this is RCW 41-14-190, political activities regulated, not condemned and not eliminated. Just they needed to be controlled because, well, I'll get into that in a minute. No person holding any office, place, position, or employment subject to civil service shall contribute to any political fund or render any political service to any person or party whatsoever. It continues on with more detail. You can look it up. Okay? I believe the rationale behind this restriction or regulation has to do with political favors. If people contribute monetarily of substance or are actively campaigning for that candidate for sheriff, then once that sheriff is elected, how is that going to affect him? What is he obliged to do in return for that support? It also is a concern about what not only their expectations, but how is he going to fairly and unbiasedly administer it. The second half of that statute that I didn't read talks about, and they shall not prohibit or do anything impunitive to those people who do not contribute to that campaign. So it's a matter of keeping objectivity, keeping it fair, keeping it honest, and not getting involved where there's disruption to the operation of the office, the divisiveness that occurs because of that, and to maintain a manner of professionalism in the conducting of business in the sheriff's office. I think that addresses it. Thank you.
Enough of those kind of questions, sir.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question of both sheriff candidates. The Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission is the legislatively authorized function that sets the standards and training for all police officers, sheriffs, county sheriffs, city police in the state of Washington. So I'd like to ask this of both sheriffs. Number one, are you fully certified, which includes having a polygraph test, a psych evaluation, and a background test? And if you're fully qualified and certified, when did you get it? And if you haven't got it, why not? And if you haven't got it, would you make a promise to the voters to complete that certification, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, before the election?
Who wants to be first? Mark? Go ahead. You're first.
Good show. The question was, am I certified? And when I got tested, I was certified before employing with the Washington State Patrol back in 1985, and before taking up gainful employment with the Clickitat County Sheriff's Office, I again had to go through that same process. There's a reason for this process. Because of the independence of a law enforcement officer to operate under color of law with great authority and great responsibility, there is ample opportunity for misconduct. So the whole purpose of putting this requirement both at the start of employment when you enter the career and when you start employment with a new employer, you are required to take the polygraph and the psychological evaluation and the background investigation to make sure that that person is suitable for a position. So I did that last year, 2013, in about May. And then I started on later with the Sheriff's Office on July 10th. So all of my certification and all of my prerequisite tests and examination, and it was lengthy. I mean, they get real nitty gritty. They ask you a lot of very intimate questions in the course of that psychological evaluation. I was down at Lake Oswego and the doctor's facility down there for about 8 hours answering the gamut of 4 different tests, because not only was I lateral officer, but I was the supervisor officer that I was being hired for. And then I was in management, so there was another set of test questions in there, and then in executive leadership. So it took like an entire day to go through that, and then there was the exit interview where I was interviewed by the psychologist, and he went in great depth and asked me a lot of personal questions. Those questions were then compared and re-answered certain specific things by the polygraph examiner, and a totally different individual based on those questions I was asked. So it is a thorough vetting prior to employment that I went through. And frankly, I think that it's unreasonable to expect that you, as a sheriff candidate, do not live up to that same standard prior to being elected. The law also makes provision for the elected official of any kind, not just a sheriff. It exempts them from having to take a poli-psych background. So there is no basis to require, and this is straight out of RCWs, RCW 43-101-080, subsection 19, says that they are not required to take the test. So even if he submitted to the test after he's elected, folks, the horse is out of the barn. There is no recourse, and there's nobody to require it. He has said so. He has said at earlier campaigns or campaigns, and I said, well, I'll take it after I'm in. But who is going to evaluate that? Okay, and what is the difference between taking that voluntarily now and him taking it voluntarily after the election? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I can tell you I've done nothing wrong. I'm not scared to take a polygraph test or a psychological test. In fact, one time I did take a psychological test, and I'm sure, Tom Reynolds, you must have missed that in vetting this, in Sherwood, for sergeant, and passed it. And
It was a long time ago, Bob, as you said.
Well, that's right, we're going back 35 years on this stuff. Anyway, I have no reason to dodge a polygraph or psych. But let me say, when I came to Clickitat County from Elko, Nevada, I had not had a 2-year break in service. And that's what triggers a poly or a psych test. I went to work in 2000 and as a range timber deputy and as a reserve deputy for Clickitat County. Sometime in 2002 or 2005, I think Mark probably has the date written down, the state passed their training laws that if you moved from one department to another, you would have to recertify. Or if you had a break of 2 years in service, you'd have to get recertified. And anybody that was hired on prior to the 2002 or 2005, it escapes me on the particular date, which I was, as a range timber deputy, that you were grandfathered in. However, I knew nothing about that. Never heard about it. The sheriff never come to me and said, oh, well, by the way, Bob, you need to get recertified. There was no mention of that whatsoever until Mr. Boardman come on board with the sheriff's office. And that's at the time they started having problems with the range timber deputy contract. It started out that we're donating too many hours. I never got in trouble in my life for donating hours, but apparently they were concerned about that. And I said, there's a solution to that, Mark. I just won't donate the hours. Well, then it was, well, you're gonna have to get recertified. I said, I've been doing the job for 13 years, why do I gotta get recertified? Well, they passed this law and that you have to get recertified. I said, well, before I get recertified, I wanna check with the Left One Retirement Board to make sure that doesn't foul up my retirement. Anyway, we had another meeting with Mark, and he was gonna set up a meeting with the sheriff, the prosecutor's office, the training commission, and we'd go through that, and that meeting was around the first part of January 2014. We're going to go through that with the training commission in a telephone conference. Well, after we left his office, about 2 or 3 days later, on January 8th, a full-page article of mine came out, listing all of my citizen endorsements, law enforcement endorsements, which I'm so proud to have. 2 days later, we get a call from Sheriff McComas. The Deputy Harold Cole, who was the other range timber deputy, and I were supposed to show up for a meeting at 3 o'clock. So we did, thinking it was the meeting that Mark was setting up for us to get this ironed out with the training commission on my recertification. However, in that meeting, we were fired. And so, straightforward, and I am not lying to you folks, straightforward. I was never offered the polygraph. I was never set up for a psychological test. I was terminated before I could do it. So therefore, the training commission, if I went out right today and took a poly and a psych, the training commission will not recognize it as recertification because you have to be a member of the law enforcement agency or a condition for hire for a law enforcement agency. And that's a blatant truth. But they've used this to spin it that I'm not qualified. I have 3 academies. Washington Basic Law Enforcement Academy, the Nevada Law Enforcement Academy, and the FBI National Academy. I have an associate's degree, a bachelor's, and a master's degree, and 14 and a half years in top management, 40 years in the business. Honorably done. And I take exception to that kind of conduct.
I got two questions from you guys, and then we'll go down the line.
This question is for Mr. Dingenthal. Your recent interview at, how would you do that? Your recent interview in the Sentinel mentioned the Northwest Forest Plan, specifically involved the Gifford-Pinchot Forest. You said that problems recently recognized by Jamie Hura Butler have existed for years. It's a 3-part question. What are these problems, and how would you address them? Our environment is important to me, but I recognize your economy need for jobs. How do you propose to balance these 2 needs?
Sure. And actually, this is something I've been working on for quite a while now. A national forest like the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest is by definition there for 2 reasons. One is economic and the other is conservation. So you need to find a balance. That's what the law says. That's why and there's a lot of things you can do in a national forest. You can log, you can mine, you can herd cattle, you can do all these different things. And when you're in a forest-dependent area, particularly Klickitat County for the most part, in this case, you need to figure out a way to balance that. So as part of the Gifford-Pinchot Task Force, we worked with collaborative groups that included loggers, that included mill owners, that included citizens, and we were generally either the only environmental group or one of 2. And we took on responsibilities to help not only work with these collaborative groups, but find funding for them to continue to exist. The intention of a group like this is to find a way to find that balance. And we incorporate the latest science. How can you get as much timber out of the forest as you can in the most sustainable way? In years, and we saw this in the Northeast, logging companies come in, log everything flat, leave, economy dies, the environment's a mess. So we can do a better job, and we've learned a lot with that. Now, where I take exception to what Jamie Hura Butler has done, her staff would show up occasionally at these collaborative meetings. They've been going on for 10 years. So for her to come out of nowhere and say, we've got out-of-the-box ideas, let's look at another way to do this. Well, we've already done that. If you're there, if you show up, if you do the work, if you're regularly there, you know the work that's being done. Now, the Forest Service has some serious issues. Their funding's been cut year after year after year after year. And now they're in a position where most of the money, like 75% of the money in the Forest Service is spent on fire suppression. If they had more funding or they were more focused on doing some of the work to get some of this timber off the forest in an efficient and environmentally sustainable way, we wouldn't have this buildup of fuel there that makes it a fire trap. But until they have enough money to bid the timber sales, it just will not get done. And I think her indication there was it had all to do with that the environmental groups are the one that were stopping this from happening. That is simply not true.
Commissioner Sauer.
I get the last word.
Yes. We'd like to hear you speak. Why doesn't the county pay off all debt rather than backing the current debt with cash? Does this not amount to gambling with taxpayer money?
I guess that's a good question. Well, actually, my wife asked me the same question when I was prepared. I had read her the stuff. The reason why, and maybe a little background, because you're referring to my comments that were in the enterprise, and I don't know if there could be folks here that don't get the enterprise, probably would read it in the Sentinel. The county's total liabilities right now are about $5.7 million in debt, of which $1.9 million, I think, is bonds on the Pioneer Center, $3.9 million are bonds on the Dallasport wastewater treatment plant, and $250,000 is the county's share of a $500,000 loan for the airport business park that I talked about earlier. So it totals about $5.7 million. The county has about $19 million in reserves. And we did pass a resolution here several years ago that it was important to us that those reserves, that we actually have restricted the portion of those reserves so they back all of that debt. And so we could pay off the debt tomorrow and there would be no debt. But debt, while I'm not a big advocate of debt, debt is a useful tool when you, as a financial system. Most of these debt, and the idea originally, and this had the backing of the treasurer as well, back when this was done, was that generally the county used to get a significant amount of revenue from interest that it earned on its assets. And most of these debts are very extremely low interest rates. I think the Dallasport wastewater treatment, it's a 0.5 point is what it is. So this is very low debt. And so we're saving that cash because we use it for other infrastructure projects that we may not know. And so I would really not say that we're not gambling at all, because with that resolution in place, if something happened to our revenue streams, namely the landfill, that would kick in and those debts would be cleared and the county would still have a significant amount of capital reserves. So there's no risk at all. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, maybe targeted at two minutes candidate. If we'll start and ping pong back and forth. So Mike, can we start with you?
So, my whole campaign is about fiscal responsibility. So, at the Bingleton debate a few nights ago, it was said that I brought up some numbers, and it was brought up that, well, you can make numbers say whatever you want to. However, I did want to bring up just a couple of numbers here tonight. This, and I brought them with me, so if anybody wants to see these afterwards, please see me. In 2007, during Commissioner Sauter's first term, the total budget for Klickitat County was $29 million, roughly speaking. Last year, it was $53 million for an 80% increase in the budget. Can I get a show of hands, whose budget here has increased 80% since 2007? That's what I thought. So in the commissioner's offices, the budgets under their control have increased by 120% since 2006. And this is from the amended budgets. The other total elected control budget, so this is the budgets that are under the other offices, the other electeds that make their own budgets. Their budgets increased by roughly 10% over the same time frame. All the departments that make up, they bring in their own funds, their budgets also increased by about 10% over the same time period. One other thing that I wanted to bring up, Commissioner Sauter mentioned in 2013, we did a public records request for all commissioner travel reimbursements for 2012. One commissioner in 2012 was compensated about $2,000, $1,898. Another commissioner was compensated $4,354 for the entire year of 2012. My opponent, Commissioner Sauter, was compensated $13,280. This is public records, anybody can get this. My campaign is about fiscal responsibility. This kind of stuff has to stop. We need to put a stop to taking in all this money and spending it on infrastructure projects. Some infrastructure projects are absolutely necessary. I don't dispute that whatsoever. The Dallas Port Industrial Park, what's going up right now, I don't believe that that falls under government purview. That's something that should be left to the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think I've had the opportunity to address the questions, and thank you for everyone that coming out here. The thing that's really sticking to me, that I have to say, Mr. Brownback, I think just gave some of the best advice you heard tonight. If you know a teenager going to college, make sure they go and get a useful degree. I can tell you, when I doubled down and got an English and philosophy degree, I didn't have a lot of choice but to end up going to law school or making coffee. I'm glad I went to law school. It's given me an opportunity to being an attorney. Attorney can be a very rewarding practice in helping people. And right now, I'm in the position as a concerned citizen that I just want to help folks in this county. I want to help the community, hold people accountable, and that's why I'm running. I'm not going to sit up here and take pot shots. I think it was to address questions that weren't answered, and it cracks me up. I get an engineering degree if you know someone at 17 about to go to college. Then make sure you tell them that. We don't need more lawyers.